If you've ever felt betrayed by your own body, exhausted from doing everything right, and still not feeling better, today's conversation with Amy Beheimer might completely change how you think about autoimmune health. Hi, I'm Emma Sutherland, clinical naturopath, author, mum, and your host. With over 20 years in clinical practice, I've helped thousands of women and their families transform their health using evidence-based integrative strategies. Joining us today is Dr. Amy Beheimer, who is a board-certified health and wellness coach and doctor of pharmacy, who lives with and helps people with autoimmune disease feel better and function better using simple science-backed habits. Her work focuses on moving people out of doing everything right and into a sustainable approach that actually fits real life. Through coaching and her podcast, Autoimmune Health Secrets, Amy helps people work with their bodies by paying attention to how they think, feel, and act every single day. She believes that better health isn't built through perfection or willpower, but by learning the skill of habit change with clarity, compassion, and support. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to delve into this. This whole autoimmune topic to me is fascinating. And I know you work with people who, they're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, they're worn out by their autoimmune journey. I know from working with patients that it's a very long, exhausting journey for many patients. So, what's one early mindset shift that helps people feel in control of their health, even when their diagnosis feels really scary and very unpredictable?
Way to jump right into the deep end. I love it. I feel like a lot of times it takes a little bit of time to get to the mindset shifts, but it's way more effective if we start there, because then we're building on a foundation that feels more empowering and feels more hopeful and in control, like you mentioned. So the biggest mindset shift that it can take time. So if I say this and you or your listeners are thinking, oh gosh, I'm not close to that, that's okay. But the one that is worth working towards is when you hear the word autoimmune, we instantly, most people, think of what you just mentioned, this exhaustion. It's tiring, it's uncertain, there's fatigue, there's symptoms. Is it going to progress? And that's very natural because that's what we're dealing with in that moment. But planting a little baby belief seed and giving it time every day to nurture it and to water it and to fertilize it and to put it in good soil, the seed that I call autoimmune health, that when we see the word autoimmune, we could first habitually, by default, think about the health that we're going to create because of the autoimmunity. And I had to come to that, me going first over 10 years ago, looking at, wow, I was so focused naturally on this chronic, progressive, debilitating disease. And I'm like, wait, but there are so many things I can do to ensure the other parts of my mental and emotional and even physical health are even better than they would be, because I wouldn't have had my attention grabbed by anything other than a diagnosis like I got.
Mm. And talking about that, if you're happy to share with us, can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey?
Absolutely. The first time I ever heard the word autoimmune was in high school. I started having some white patches on my skin. And now, I know it's autoimmune disease called vitiligo. And I didn't do much difference. I didn't love the look of it. I was in my teens. It was on my face and my hands, but I kept on keeping on. It's not super harmful. It's just more of an aesthetic. So I was in pharmacy school in my early 20s, and I was really learning what could go right with the body and what could go wrong with the body. And so naturally, I was learning all about autoimmune diseases and how they can really wreak havoc across all of our systems. And the part that worried me was they tend to cluster. If you have one, your chances of another one go up and up and up. And so I started just having this little inkling like, oh, maybe vitiligo is not my only one. So a couple years later, I was diagnosed with a thyroid autoimmune disease called Graves. And then a few years after that, at 27, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And that was the one that my body's whispers, I say, turned to a scream, and I had to pay attention. And so there really is a before and an after of that diagnosis. And yeah, that's a lot of the reason I am here talking to you today.
Yeah. And I always love when I'm speaking to somebody that has a personal passion when they're being touched by something, because you can see the passion shine through and they go the extra mile to really find solutions. But to get some kick into the autoimmune side of things, just in everyday language, can you explain how autoimmunity works and why it tends to affect women so much more than men?
Absolutely. It is auto, which means self, and then immune is a reference to our immune system. So normally, our immune system is our protector. So it keeps cells in check to lead to less cancer. It likes to go in and defend us against foreign invaders of all sorts, infections, viruses, bacteria, things like that. What happens with autoimmunity is wires are crossed, and the immune system, which thinks it's protecting us, actually turns and starts to damage our native cells. And what can be so frustrating about autoimmunity, kind of how we opened, is that that can happen across all sorts of different tissues and organs and systems in our body. So there's no autoimmune doctor, because if it's happening in your thyroid, you may see an endocrinologist. If it's happening in your kidneys, you may see a rheumatologist. In your joints, you may see a rheumatologist. In your nervous system, like MS, you would see a neurologist. And so it's really spread out. There's no one expert often. And so the principles remain the same. And here's the good news, is that while there are some really powerful, good medications that can help prevent damage and do what it can to halt progression of the disease, the lifestyle things that we're going to talk about, the things that we can control, applies to every single human body, whether you have autoimmune disease or not.
I think it's a really good point you mentioned. And it's what I hear from patients is part of the frustration is that they often feel they are sort of bounced between specialists and that nobody really has complete view of the holistic picture. And that in itself can feel very disempowering. So I love that you point that out, that that is the way that it works. And we have to look at the common denominators of what we can do that's within our power. And you really talk a lot about moving people out of doing everything right and into habits that actually fit their life. And as a naturopath, I love how realistic this is. So, what does that look like? And especially if someone already feeling overwhelmed by usually very conflicting health advice between specialists, GPs, chat GPT, well meaning neighbor. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Overwhelm is the number one emotion that people are feeling when they make their way to me. And often it is also the feeling that prevents them from reaching out when they first meet me. A lot of people will say, "Oh my gosh, I've been watching this or wanting to join or really curious, but I was just too overwhelmed." And so it might be the 8th or 10th or 15th time they heard me say, "We can simplify this." And it really starts with just recognizing that that feeling of overwhelm is coming from the massive amount of information, the infobesity crisis that we are in. And information, when the internet became available, it was amazing that we could all get information, but we have swung so far on the other end that it paralyzes us. It stops us from taking action. So one of the first things that I do with every single person is, yes, there are a lot of things we can do, but we've got to start with just one. There is nothing more relieving. I can almost, feel the collective sigh of relief when somebody really, buys in and says, "Okay, so I'm trusting that if I start with this one tiny goal, you're saying that things could become clearer and easier and simpler along the way." And I say, "Yes, trust me, trust in the tiny," and really just starting with the one thing, because the beauty of all the different things we could be doing at the root of it, if we take the time to learn the skill of how to change habits, how to change things that feel hard to change, that's a skill that you get to hone and develop in practice. And if you are working on it in something related to what you want to eat or not eat, or showing up for a workout, if you are honing that skill, when it's time to bring your next habit up, when it's time to, add a habit or shift to a new one that you want, a new goal, that skill is strengthened and you get to use it and you're that much more effective at it the next time. So yeah, that overwhelm, if you're feeling it, you're not alone. And overwhelm itself is very inflammatory. I mean, feelings are the emotion of our cells. And so your body, whether it has an autoimmune disease or not, it does not want to live in that overwhelmed state. So really finding a way to simplify and to trust in the tiny. That's a rule. It's a strategy from my ABC Habit Playbook that works every time. It's something my clients are breathing to me left and right because we've said it so many times. We can trust in the tiny.
Mm. And one thing that I would love to add to that is what I see clinically is, yes, absolutely, this sense of overwhelm and this sense of paralysis, but also a sense of, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And then that then shifts into almost a self-blame that they have an autoimmune condition. Yeah, almost a self-blame that we have an autoimmune condition, that they did something wrong or they're not doing something well or correctly or right. How would you describe that psychological angle of autoimmunity? Because I agree with you, it's so pro-inflammatory and it's something we do need to address.
Yeah, you mentioned in your question previously, but I didn't answer the second part of this. Why is it happening so much in women? And this kind of ties into it. There is this pattern, this commonality in women, and especially high achieving women, women who carry a lot in their personal life, in their family life. And stress with autoimmunity is not only a cause, not only something that can trigger a diagnosis or a disease, but it's also an effect of the disease. So you start to see this cycle, and a lot of times cycles can be called vicious cycles. The stress causes a flare, the flare makes you stressed, and it could be this vicious cycle. But here's another mindset shift that we could focus on is just as able for a cycle to become vicious, it can also become an upward spiral. That same momentum that with a slight downward trend can pull us down, it's going to work to our favor when we can, for example, start with something simple, when we can start seeing progress, when we can build some momentum, then it really can be not a vicious cycle, but a lovely cycle. I teach a lot about the momentum cycle and how when we break it down, it really can do so much. And you have such good questions right now. So I want to address the one about it being our fault. I mean, that is something I call a thought error, meaning it feels true, but if we really look at it, it can never be proven, and it's not kind, it's not helpful. There's no use in thinking it. And so once we see that we may have that thought in there, that is one that is worth running through what I call, it's the scientist pharmacist in me, where I talk about habits not only in what we're doing or not doing, but I talk about habits in how we're thinking and how we're feeling, because those are habitual. They are familiar, they're autopilot. And so the thought that this is my fault or I did something to cause this, that we probably thought it so many times we think it's true. We can decide, hey, that's a goal, a habit I want to break. And when we can break that habit of automatically thinking it, then the downstream effect of feeling less guilt, more self-love, again, is going to help us hit that upward spiral.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And what I think of with my brain when you say that is the placebo effect. We have a very established placebo effect that we see in clinical trials, which tells us the mind is so powerful. And you're right, if we can shift how we're thinking and how we're feeling, then the physiology follows, the body follows from that. I think that that's such a profound starting point for people with autoimmunity is don't worry so much about trying to do the restrictive diet right now. start with the way you're thinking and feeling about the autoimmunity so that that actually impacts long-term change. Because, you like me would see the people that are trying the very restrictive diet, but they always fail in the long term. So actually, let's dive into that. Why do they fail in the long term?
If we are only focused on what we're doing or not doing and not going to the root of the issue, and the root being the thoughts and feelings behind it, then it just doesn't stick. It doesn't become natural because it's kind of trying hard to um, nurture a plant just above ground, not getting into the soil, not getting into the roots of what grows this healthy plant. So even the word restrictive,
Mhm.
restrictive in our brains, it has a certain connotation of I am missing out. This is a punishment for something.
Mhm.
And so even, another play from my playbook is words matter. So even softening it and looking at what are the thoughts and feelings behind someone, and maybe use an example of someone in your life that seems to eat in a really loving way, that seems to have a good relationship with food. What are they thinking about food? And it's likely that they're thinking, oh my gosh, food can be delicious and it can be good for me. Or, I'm able to say no to these things or in moderation. And any of those thoughts or beliefs about food that you want, they can be achieved. It's not either that we are born a positive thinker or we're not. It is a skill set that we can teach and that I do teach, because the most frustrating thing I think is seeing or hearing someone give whether it's a mantra or, a quote that you stops your scroll and you're like, wow, that must be nice. But if we aren't able to internalize it and really believe it for ourselves, we're not going to get the benefit. And so really looking and taking ownership that I can learn how to shift this thinking to become more of my habitual autopilot way.
Mhm. But when it comes to changing habits, habits can be very hard to change. What's the difference between willpower and skill? Because I think there is a difference there, but I'm not quite sure how to grab hold of either of those.
Yeah. This kind of ties into your other question too. If you're thinking like I should do this or I should do that, there is a lot of really good habit research that I geek out over, because again, the scientist in me, it means if we have good research, it means, hey, this works, it's reproducible. And there's a lot of good research. And BJ Fogg is one researcher. He's an author. He wrote Tiny Habits. And he says there are two habit absolutes. And one of those two absolutes is that it has to be something that you deeply desire. And so if we find we're saying we should do this or should do that, we're already setting ourselves up not to follow through on that first habit absolute. So maybe that first tiny habit that you start with, you don't start for the one that you don't desire yet. We can build desire for the things that are good for us, but start with one that you really, really want to do. Because if you think about it, the word willpower is power over your will. That's
Mm.
power over your desire. If we feel like we need power over our desire, then likely we don't desire it that much. So, a good way to start is to recognize that desire is going to work way better than willpower. And starting really with what do you want to be doing and reminding yourself over and over, this is something that you want, not something that you should be doing.
Yeah. So give us a tangible working example of that. So when you're working with probably mostly women, what are some small things that you know people would say to you, yes, I want that. Like it's a towards motivation, not the away motivation of running away from pain and fear and overwhelm, but a toward motivation. What's some working examples?
This is a good example. I just had a session earlier this week with one of my sweet club members, and we were talking about this because she was coming back from vacation and she wanted to get back on her feel good food protocol. That is what we call it. We with
I
intention
love
create
that.
create the protocol that is unique to us. It includes joy eating. It includes eating for fuel. It includes all the things that we want to include on it. And so she also has a vacation protocol, which we create because when you leave and you get out of your normal routine, she's like, I want to be able to have that pizza with my niece and nephew. So she was coming back and she was struggling a little bit. And so we were looking at, well, what are you thinking again? What's going on in that moment? Let's tap back into why you created this feel good food protocol in the first place. And she was snacking a lot on things that were, her healthier snacks, but way too many. And so I said, so let's tap back in. Why do you want to do that? And she's like, well, it's on my protocol. I'm like, well, why did you add it to your protocol? She's like, gosh, because I get a stomach ache when I overeat it. I go, okay, well, why else? She's like, well, I also do want to lose a few pounds, so that helps. And I said, why else? And she's like, well, the sodium, my blood pressure does go up. I'm like, okay, why else? She's like, I sleep better. So like we kept going. We ended up with 6 really good whys that, I held it up and looked because I was writing them down. And she's like, oh, I do want this. And so tapping into that desire versus I need to follow this protocol. Because first of all, you're setting your own protocol with what we know about the science, but you have to bring in what you know about yourself as well.
Yeah, and I love how individualized your focus is, that no two people are the same. As a naturopath, is one of our very strong philosophies. And also, my personal philosophy is that nobody knows that person better than that person. They know their body better than anybody else, and they have intuitive wisdom where they can dive in and discover a lot if they either have the coaching or the support to do so.
Well, and going back to the skill, me and you today, we are different humans than we will be next year. So instead of saying, oh my God, I have to refigure this all out, we go back to the skills we learned to figure it out the first time, which is why it's so helpful to understand, a good starting point. And we have good research on things that we have a pretty good idea are going to help a lot of people feel better. And so, but those individualities really are what make it really natural and not feel like deprivation, not feel like restriction, because you are still able to engage with life even in a better way because you don't have the effects of food or over or under exercising draining your energy without you even being aware of it.
And that's one thing that I really do want to point out to the people watching or listening to this is that generic protocols don't work. They need to be individualized. And I feel generic protocols will only add to the overwhelm because it's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It's not going to click. It's not going to work. And when you are living with an autoimmune condition, whether you can cure it or not, I'm not sure, but you need to learn how to manage it, which means that the way that you eat, the way you think, the way you move, the way you breathe, it needs to just become part of your lifestyle, not a 12-week program or it's really about enhancing that diet and lifestyle to become sustainable.
Yeah, everything that I do and everything I offer, I always use 3 words, IRL, in real life. Because
Yes.
I want you to learn with me in real life. I want you to practice with me in real life because, again, this isn't, okay, pause life, I'll do this later. It's how do we incorporate this? I kind of call our live times we come together every week like practice, like you're coming to
Yes.
practice. Now get out there in your life and put it to, that's game time. And, occasionally I'll still get someone who will reply on, call reminder and, oh, I can't make it. My granddaughter's visiting. And I'm like, you're in game time. This is why you're here. So we don't need to apologize and don't worry, there'll be a replay. But everything, I've even been doing a lot more experimentation. I'm running a consistency challenge right now. It's all in the inbox because I realize there are some calls that people can come to for extra support, but we're consistently in our inbox every day. And if I promise you, if you give me 5 minutes of attention and focus, that you will leave that 5 minutes from a little, audio lesson or video lesson from me to go apply it to what you're working on, we're going to keep coming back for more. So the people who join when the timing is not perfect actually end up being able to stick with it because when something happens, they don't have to say, oh, shoot, I can't do this anymore. We're learning in real life, IRL, hands down.
Yeah. And I love the way that that leads into having a little bit of gray. I'm often saying to my patients, we live in the gray. We don't live in black and white. And that sort of very dualistic thinking can be very challenging, especially what I find is that the women that come to see me do have busy lives. They're high achievers. They're often type A personality. They're perfectionists. So it takes a lot of support and reassurance for them to really start understanding that it doesn't have to be so polarizing. It's okay to be in the gray, the IRL. And I love how you frame that.
Yeah. I had another client who's in this consistency challenge with me, and she was one of the brave souls who really wanted to talk about what is my goal. So everybody, got to watch and we're coming up with our goal. And her goal was, we ended up paring it down because she was in a very busy season, and it was breathing intentionally. And she sent me a message like 8 days in, and she said, I'm really sorry. Like, I haven't been engaging in the challenge, but I have been doing my breathing every day. And again, I just offered to her, what do you mean? You're nailing it. It's just that thought that I need to do it perfect, or I need to do this or that, and it's like, you are nailing it. She wrote back, she's like, God, I am. And that one mindset shift took her from feeling lack and like she was doing something wrong to really owning, I am proud of myself. I am breathing.
Yeah. And I think, well, when I think about the statistics on autoimmunity, 10% of the global population live with an autoimmune condition. But when we think about the demographic that you and I are working with, which is, women usually between the ages of 20 to 60, let's say, a much higher percentage of our demographic is suffering from autoimmunity. So I think that these conversations are profoundly important. I feel that these conversations are not being given the airtime that they should. And the emotional ups and downs that come with autoimmune journeys, can you tell us a little bit about what you learned through your personal journey on that emotional side? And what are you still learning?
I am still learning every day. My favorite thing
Yeah.
that when my clients say, oh my God, I can tell you're doing this with me, because the truth is I don't get to graduate health school, right? I mean, I don't get to
Yes.
not keep working on this. It's very human. And I have new goals and old goals that come back, and I get to retest my skills. And so people see that and they love it, because then again, they're not beating themselves up that they haven't finished it yet. I have physicians and nurses and therapists and other coaches in my group, and I think other people love that. They're like, wait, these are the experts saying that I'm going to get support. And it's like, yeah, we all do. We all can use support. But back to your question of the emotional journey, when I got that diagnosis, I mean, I truly believed my life would always be worse. I truly did.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was such a life quake. It was such a devastation that I was at a point where I'm like, something's got to change. And thank goodness that I was open to looking at my mindset, because I was really good at eating, quote, perfect, moving, quote, perfect, doing check, 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 all the outer habits. But something was missing, and you cannot outnourish, you cannot outrun a crappy mindset. And all that mattered to me was, how am I feeling? Do I feel like my life is worse? And so the first belief seed that I planted was, it's possible my life doesn't need to be worse. That shifted me from this fear into a curiosity of, how could that be possible? Which then the next step became the next step, became the next step. And I ended up in this place where I recognize we have so much more control of how we're thinking and how we're feeling than we ever thought. We're not taught this stuff. And at the end of the day, I mean, our emotion is our prize, right? How do we feel? Do we feel like we can show up for our life? The hugest thing for me is the ripple effect, because you mentioned 10% of the globe has autoimmunity. But then, all you listeners, do you have a family member, or God forbid, a child? The incidence of juvenile autoimmune diseases is on the rise. And so when you come in and you go first and you don't force family members to change, but they notice the change in you and they get curious, sometimes I think that's the best way we can love on anybody is to love on ourselves first. And that ripple effect is so contagious.
And it's also very inspiring. So if you're coming from that sort of overwhelmed mindset and you see somebody going through that, it gives you a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration that things can be different for you. It provides evidence that things can be different. And I think that's the first step is seeing some evidence and having the belief that it's possible.
And that's proven in research. In my community on a call a couple weeks ago, I had one member who she's training for a marathon. And so, we're talking through it and everybody has their own goals going on. But another member came on and is really wrapping her brain around 5 minutes of exercise in the morning. That's her goal. That's her trusting in the tiny. The first member reminded us that a year ago, we could go back and watch it. She started with 5 minutes of exercise in the morning. So, I mean, it's just, it's so powerful. And if we ever think, oh goodness, I don't need a community, I don't need to be in a group, it's likely you're thinking about the wrong kind of group. I think that free groups that are not led and held by experts sometimes give groups a bad name and recognize that there's a very powerful belonging that comes when it's a well-executed group that is not a dumping ground and is not a field for unsolicited advice.
Yes, I love that. My goodness. And just to finish off, are there any myths that you want to bust, or any last thoughts? This has been such a great, engaging conversation. I've loved it so much. What would you like to finish with?
I think that going back to trust in the tiny, going back to the fact that, I mean, it's probably the reality that if you're listening, you may have some level of overwhelm. And if not, I'm glad, but you may have some level of overwhelm. And so to address that, I created a quiz. It's free. It takes about 3 minutes. It's 7 questions. It's based on this wonderful world of habit research, and it helps you get a personalized result of a key area of your lifestyle that is most likely to give you the biggest bang for your energy buck to start with. So,
Right.
yep. So, and the best part that I love, because I said this the other day, that if I had to be known for anything, it's the how. Like, okay, this would be great, but how do I do it? How do I do it? And so after you get your result, whether it's food, whether it's movement, whether it's mindset, then I give you support for the next step of the how. Okay, that must be nice, Amy, but how do I do it? So taking that quiz kind of opens the door to me being able to share, a bit more about what we're talking about and helping you actually make that thing a reality, make that habit a reality.
Yeah, IRL. Make it a habit in real life. I love how practical you are. So, Amy, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Absolutely. The quiz is one place because you'll get an email and I'm always a reply away. So it doesn't matter what email comes from me. It's only me. You can tell me what you like, what you don't like, what question you have, what struggle you have. That's one way. I also have a podcast. We are coming up hot on 200 episodes. So there's quite a treasure trove there. It's called,
Congratulations.
oh, thank you. Thank you. It's become such a love, but it's called Autoimmune Health Secrets. And it's called that because I think habits are the worst kept secret. We all know they can help us feel and function better. But the best kept secret, again, is an approach to actually make them work in your real life. So there's the podcast, the quiz. And if anybody feels like, oh my gosh, this is the time I want to come join for some coaching and my eyeballs on your world and life and thoughts and emotions, then that's available at my website, www.amybeheimercoaching.com/join.
Beautiful. Well, we'll make sure we put all of the links to the podcast, the quiz, and your website in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And I just love getting to connect with people across the world.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time, Amy. Thank you so much for being with me today. Don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button below. Check out the links in the show notes for more health empowering information.